the Titanic was behind schedule and arrived in Cherbourg at dusk, about an hour late. Docking facilities there were too small to accommodate the new liner, so the 274 passengers and their luggage were ferried out by the new tender's Nomadic and Traffic, built specifically for Olympic and Titanic. Among them was Denver millionaire Mrs. J.J. Brown, who would later be immortalized as the unsinkable Molly Brown. Mr. John Jacob Astor, one of the richest men in the world, with his new wife, 18-year-old Madeline, along with 30 second-class and 102 third-class passengers, also boarded. At 8 p.m., with the new passengers embarked, incoming mail loaded, and outgoing mail dispatched, the Titanic was ready to depart. Around 8:10, her propellers churned back to life, and she was underway to her final Old World destination at Queenstown. Titanic's first night afforded her passengers the opportunity to explore the new liner, and all through the ship, people remarked how steady she was, and how you could scarcely feel as if you were on a ship even though there was a gale blowing up top. A young Jesuit seminarian, Francis Brown, had been pleasantly surprised in early April with a gift from his uncle Robert, the Bishop of Cologne, a first-class ticket from Southampton to Queenstown aboard the Titanic. Fortunately, Frank Brown was an enthusiastic amateur photographer, and it is from him that we have a record of life on board, even if only for the day-and-a-half trip from Southampton to Queenstown. This particular view is taken from the boat deck looking aft. You can see A deck in the foreground, the after well deck, which is part of C deck, in the middle, and the poop deck furthest aft. Both the well deck and poop deck served as a promenade and recreation space for the third-class passengers. Opening scene on the well deck led to the third-class entrance. This view from the aftermost point on A deck looks forward. The two men standing on the boat deck above are situated at the same spot where Frank Brown took the previous photograph. Here you can see the sliding doors that lead to the Veranda Cafe and the Palm Court, and if one looks very carefully, you can see the photographer's reflection in that window. The overnight trip took Titanic around Land's End, just past the St. George's Channel to the entrance to Cork Harbor. At Daunt Lightship, pilot John Whelan came aboard and guided Titanic to her anchoring position. Around noon, she dropped anchor off of Roach's Point. Aboard the tenders America and Ireland, 113 mostly young Irish immigrants were taking their first steps towards a new beginning that they believed lay across the Atlantic in America. In addition, 27 second-class passengers embarked. 3 first-class passengers, Miss Daisy Minahan and her brother and sister-in-law, came aboard. We shall encounter Miss Minahan later in our story. In this picture, we see Lightoller looking down on the tenders from the starboard forward E-deck door as Murdoch peers around the corner to join in the viewing activity below. This poignant view portrays 2 officers side by side, completely unaware that in 4 days only one of them will still be alive. At 1:55, the Titanic weighs anchor and prepares to leave the harbor. This view, taken from one of the tenders, shows construction details in that the steel plates overlapped each other and that the individual strakes alternated between inner and outer placement. Looking up from the tender America, Captain Smith looks down from the starboard bridge wing from a height of nearly 70 feet. 4 nights later, he would be peering aft from this same position to search for the iceberg that had mortally wounded his ship. One can gain perspective of the enormous size of the Titanic from this view looking aft. The 2 doors visible open up to the forward first-class entrance on D-deck. The Odell family, who were traveling with Frank Brown, took this photograph from the departing tender, Ireland. As the tender pulls away, the elegant yacht-like profile of the new liner almost belies the power one can sense from the ship while her engines slowly propel her back out to sea. Few ships have achieved such simplicity and cleanliness of line to achieve the beauty that was Titanic. The perfect balance of her 4 funnels was partly an aesthetic consideration, as the forward 3 were functional exhaust for the boilers and the engines, while the 4th provided ventilation for the galleys. The Titanic turns out to sea in one of the last photographs taken of her. At the stern, third-class passenger Eugene Bailey played Erin's lament on his Julian pipes for his fellow immigrants as they watched the Irish coast fade astern forever. The Titanic passed Fastnet Light, which is the traditional beginning of the Great Circle route on the outward track that would lead to the corner at 42 degrees north latitude and 47 degrees west latitude, and then west longitude, and then onto Nantucket Lightship. As the ship skirted the Irish coast, lookouts George Hogg and Alfred Evans inquired about binoculars to Lightoller. During the shake-up of officers, Davy Blair, who was second officer, was in charge of the binoculars, had stowed them away and neglected to mention to Lights exactly where they were. The lookouts, therefore, had no binoculars for the duration of the voyage, even though Evans repeatedly asked them. As the coast of Ireland receded in the distance, the ship began to settle to her routine. A full complement of passengers sat down at their meals. Those in first class settled into a dining room that featured individual chairs that could actually be pulled out from the tables, rather than the usual swivel chairs bolted to the deck. While the second class still ate at long tables with the bolted swivel chairs, the food was comparable to first class in most other ships. As Thursday night gave way to Friday morning, Steward Harry Etchers quietly knocked on the door of cabin 836 at 7 and laid out fruit and tea on a table laden with plans and notes. This was Thomas Andrews' cabin, and already his notebooks were full of changes and modifications planned. The reading and writing room was not as popular with the women as thought, and so, with a smaller room, additional cabins could be installed. The hot presses at the a la carte restaurant galley were not working properly. The pebbled dashing on the private promenade was a little bit too dark, and perhaps most crucial of all, there were too many screws in the cabin coat hooks. He clearly was a man with an attention to detail. He also didn't confine himself to passengers' needs. He visited the engine room and the boiler room, finding out from the crew what they thought of the new ship. One stoker had opined that she was a beautiful job, not what we were used to in other ships, slogging our guts out nearly roasted by the heat. Violet Jessup recalled that he had paid the ultimate compliment to the Olympics catering department when he asked what changes should be made in the new ship. From then on, she said, our esteem for him already high knew no bounds. This view from the poop deck looking forward across the B deck shows a man standing in the open space between the second-class entrance and the second-class smoke room. Immediately above is A deck, and above that the uppermost second-class entrance on the boat deck. The Olympic and the Titanic were somewhat unique in that the first class and second class actually shared public space on the boat deck. First class had A deck all to themselves, and a good portion of B deck for staterooms and public rooms, with the rest of the ship for second class and steerage. During the day, the veranda cafe and the palm court became the unofficial playroom for first-class children, while at night it and the Café Parisien on B deck were popular night spots. The Marconi room was on the boat deck. Wireless apparatus was the most powerful afloat. On her trials, her signal could actually be heard in Port Said, Egypt, over 3,000 miles away. Manned by senior operator Jack Phillips, 25, and his junior, Harold Bride, these two men were not employed by White Star, but rather by Marconi Marine, although they were under the control of Captain Smith. Passengers filled out Marconi grams at the purser's office, which were then fed by wireless to the wireless room by pneumatic tubes poised over the basket seen along the far wall. The Titanic had been assigned the call letters MG9. First-class passengers could also avail themselves of a state-of-the-art gymnasium complete with electric camels and stationary bicycles. Here we see the gym instructor T.W. Macaulay demonstrating the rowing machines. Macaulay, 34, was from Aberdeen, and a cross-channel passenger recalled him as being rather strict with the passengers, but he softened his demeanor for the children on board. The room was paneled in painted white pine, and the illuminated glass painted map showed the routes of White Star liners around the world. The man on the electric camel was the electrician, William Parr, one of the builder's representatives. Frank Brown's caption for this picture ends simply, both lost. Evenings before dinner, first-class passengers, dressed in their finest, made the ceremonial descent from the grand staircases as they prepared for dinner in the dining saloon on D deck. Here we see the main staircase off the entrance of the boat deck with its grand iron and glass dome lighting the space below. Second class offered a very comfortable standard. Passenger Lawrence Beasley noted the seas were calm, but the weather was generally too cold to sit outside, so much of his time was spent in the library, shown here. Beasley recounted how he would watch third-class passengers playing in the well deck and told of a man traveling third but had placed his wife in second, and how they would visit every day at the railing separating the two. Young Eva Hart spent the day playing with her shipboard friend Nina Harper. Her father would watch her during the day while her mother slept, because, as we might remember, Mr. Hart refused to sleep at night on board, an eccentricity that did not go unnoticed by her fellow passengers. Here in the third-class dining room, food was plain, but it was more plentiful and varied than most had ever known at home. Young Frankie Goldsmith spent his days with newfound friends, climbing ladders, hanging off baggage, praying